Welcome, everyone, to Beyond Surviving, the safe space for survivors of childhood sexual abuse to receive support, resources, and share their stories. Beyond Surviving is about freedom, healing, connection, and even laughter and fun. Most importantly, it's about letting go of the pain of abuse and finally moving on. I'm Rachel Grant, and for those of you who don't yet know me, I've been a sexual abuse recovery coach since 2007, and am the author of Beyond Surviving, the final stage of recovery from sexual abuse. You can learn more about me and the Beyond Surviving program at rachelgrantcoaching.com. Now, today, you all are in for such a treat. I have to tell you, from the moment I met this woman, I was like, she's going to be on the podcast. That's just that. So Amy Paulson is here with us today, and she's going to be sharing her story and journey from victim to survivor to self-empowered to global trauma recovery educator. So let me tell you a little bit about Amy as we get started here. She is a community educator, a healing activist, and co-founder and executive director of the Gratitude Alliance, which is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to transform individual and collective trauma into healing through innovative trainings, workshops, and healing programs around the world. So she has been taking her work and into the San Francisco Bay Area, but also into places like Nepal and Kenya and South Africa and Uganda. So really bringing healing and hope to many, many regions of the world. So like many of us who are doing this work, Amy is a survivor of trauma herself. She was born in South Korea, and when she was just 1 day old, she was trafficked to an orphanage, and several months later adopted to America, where she would later be diagnosed with clinical depression, generalized anxiety disorder, and bulimia. But her story does not end there, folks, because by the time she was in her 20s, she remembered being sexually abused as a child, and she's going to tell us more about that, and more importantly, how she's been able to move forward from this trauma and step into this work that she does at Gratitude Alliance, which also meant leaving a 14-year corporate career. And so she's learned so much from her journey, and oh my gosh, just really thinking about survivors of sexual and gender-based violence, and takes all of that to inspire community leaders around the world. Beyond that, she is just a kick-ass woman. She is so wonderful to be in the presence of. She is so wonderful to be in the presence of. I adore her. I love her. And so I can't wait for you all to get to know her too. Amy, thanks so much for being here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm just so grateful. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, it has indeed. Okay, so where we're going to start today is I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your story and your healing journey.
Oh, thank you. Well, gosh, this is a story that started over 40-something years ago. And even when telling it, it's still really hard to believe that it's my life and it's not just some crazy Lifetime movie. But so I was born in South Korea, as you mentioned on the intro, and I was adopted to America at 3.5 months old, and my paperwork said I was abandoned at a police station, and there was no information to trace back my family history. So I grew up in this family where my folks are from the Midwest. Like many Korean adoptees who end up in the U.S., my parents are from Minnesota, and they had another daughter who's 2 years older who is also adopted from Korea, but not my biological sister. But so we grew up as sisters, and gosh, it was around the time that I was 12, I think, that I had started exhibiting symptoms of trauma. At that time, I was suicidal, I was depressed, and I didn't really know about depression. I just knew I didn't want to be alive anymore. It was a really hard time. I think that's a hard time for the adulthood. But I had no tools for understanding what was going on. And so by the time I was a teenager, when I was going into gosh, it was sometime around the last year or so of high school was when I was officially diagnosed with depression, anxiety, and bulimia. So by that time it had gotten pretty bad. I was sick. I must have been throwing up something like 5 times a day. I was dancing 5-6 days a week. So I wasn't exactly, I on the outside I looked like I was the picture of perfect health, at least for a dancer, thin and in shape. Inside I was just a complete mess. I was in a lot of pain, and I didn't feel like I could show that to anyone, certainly not to my parents, not to my peers at school, and not to my teachers or anyone who I might consider even somewhat of a mentor. I mean, I was this straight A student who supposedly had everything going for her at the time. It was just a complete mask. And what I later found out was a coping strategy. So, fast forward years later, decades later even, I continued my healing journey through therapy and medication. I left the U.S. and traveled for 10 years, lived and worked abroad. And I went back to Korea in 2009 to visit the place where I had lived as a baby in an orphanage. And they told me there was some information in my file that looked like it was on the back of one of the pages in handwriting. Looked like it was 4 names and 4 birth dates. And they said, "Oh, this is probably your birth family. Do you want us to search for them?" So, I had gone back there not expecting to find anything, really. I just wanted to go see where I lived as a baby. And it took me quite some time to decide whether or not I really wanted to go ahead with the search process, because all this stuff came up for me, things that I thought I had healed, around abandonment trauma, and what if this family doesn't like me? What if they don't want to reconnect? What if there's so much shame? What if they don't even find them? All the fears came up, and ultimately I decided this might be my one and only chance, and so I went ahead, started the search process, or rather the social search process, and I heard nothing for like a year and a half, and then one day I got an email saying, "Amy, this is your sister. We just found out you're alive. Mom and Dad are still alive. You have 2 older sisters and a younger brother, and we would really love to connect with you. We're your family." And my gosh, that changed everything. So 6 months later, I was on a plane to Korea to go meet reunite with my family, my biological family. And in the process, I discovered that I had not been abandoned at the police station like my paperwork said. It's complicated. My mother had just given birth to me. I was the 3rd girl in a really patriarchal society. And I think the marriage wasn't really great at the time. And my aunt and the midwife who helped deliver me took me after my mom was asleep after giving birth, took me to the orphanage. Some transaction happened. And when my mother awoke, they told her I had died. So by that time I was a sellable good, I guess you could say. I mean, lots of Korean babies were being transported over to the U.S. for international adoption. So that was just a really powerful realization, thinking, oh my gosh, so, maybe it wasn't necessarily abandonment trauma and the trauma that I grew up with thinking that no one wanted me, turned into a much more complicated narrative, and one that I still feel like I can't fully understand, and maybe am not really meant to fully understand. And so in the process of reconnecting, I also discovered that my mother, my biological Korean mother, was also orphaned. I think she was about 6 years old when the North Korean army killed her parents. And she was separated from her brother, who was 10 at the time, went to an orphanage, was adopted by a South Korean family. And so, grew up with trauma, which, later in continuing my healing journey, I discovered the intergenerational aspect of trauma and how epigenetics can provide a way for, I guess, trauma to get coded in the DNA. And so the way in which that legacy of trauma passed down, from my grandmother to my mother to me, even before I was born, was pretty profound and really changed everything. And the whole narrative that I had built for myself around, not being wanted here on this planet changed to something like, oh, okay, yeah, actually this is a legacy. And actually there's a legacy of healing that lives in me too. And so I embarked on this journey after I returned back from that really amazing experience to quit my job at the time, a 14-year career in finance, and start gratitude of hope and joy and gratitude and yes, like painful moments too. But I'm now at a place where I'm fully feeling my feelings, or at least trying to feel my feelings, and the joy and the sorrow, and not numbing in the ways that I used to before, and what a gift that is.
Wow. Yes, Amy. Thank you so much for sharing your story, and it's really beautiful to hear because as we've known each other, I've gotten bits and pieces, but to really hear and I know there's still more you could probably say. We could have a whole hour on the journey, I'm sure, but it's nice to hear some more of just the experience that you've had, and what a journey it has been, lady. I mean, my goodness. Just one of those experiences would be enough to impact someone, and the fact that you've really come through such a I don't know, there are just so many different words that are coming to mind right now. I'm a little tongue-tied because my heart is just so full of admiration and inspiration, and really just in the space of as we hear people tell their stories in this world of beyond surviving, it's really always looking at how do we take these experiences that are so traumatic and that come to shape us and define us, and then how do we redefine that for ourselves? And I hear so much of that work that you've done in your journey.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, it's so difficult with growing up with childhood trauma or any kind of trauma. It in many ways feels like it defines us, or I speak from it defined me in many ways and became part of my identity. And for so long, I was just kind of spinning in this vortex of my own story, the trauma piece of the story, and not seeing, oh yeah, there's also this strength piece, this resilience piece. And it took me decades to get to that point. And and I'm still in it. I'm still on the journey. I think it's a lifelong journey. But I feel like the reframing from being kind of in the vortex to actually seeing the empathy and the compassion, that it's sort of opened this doorway for me to feel like I can really connect to other people in their suffering, in their stories, and that I feel like is a superpower that something like trauma can give to us, but it's so hard to see that when when, I'm just deep in the story. So it takes different experiences to kind of help pull me out of that vortex. And, oh yeah, okay, there's something really beautiful here too.
Wow. Yes, and I imagine that is part of what has compelled you towards something, working with an organization called Gratitude Alliance. Finding gratitude in our experiences and how that can lead to even deeper healing. So tell me a little bit more about Gratitude Alliance. I want the listeners to really understand the work that you're...
Those organizations, yeah, well, like all things, that's been a journey as well. We started kind of with just this idea. Myself and several other co-founders came together and said, okay, what can we do in the world? I have been supporting several organizations that work with orphan children. Clearly that was an issue that was close to my heart. And we reached out to those organizations, really grassroots organizations, the type that aren't getting funding from Save the Children or UNICEF. These are like the underdog organizations that are really doing the work. And we just said, how can we support you? And over the years, 3 major things came up: education, vocational skills, so some kind of job skills training, and trauma healing. And what we learned over the years after investing in those 3 areas to support local partners was the organizations that didn't have a strong, support system for trauma and for healing trauma were having challenges with education, with vocational skills programs, with all the other kinds of support that they're giving, whether it's children, orphan children, or, organizations that work with women and girls. These individuals were suffering from trauma and either dropping out of school or running away from home, unable to finish any kind of programs or educational or job training programs. So, like the same thing that, of course, we would see here if youth who is impacted by trauma, of course, it's going to affect all the other areas of their life, and they wouldn't be able to, focus or make healthy decisions. So we see the same things around the world, and we thought, okay, this piece with trauma is so important, and if the healing doesn't happen, then all of the other investments that are made to support these individuals are not being able to be really maximized, right? And the potential of the human isn't maximized. So over the years now, we've really refined our focus, specifically now just working with trauma, and we provide what we call community education. So training teachers, spiritual leaders, social workers, caregivers, so people in the community who work with survivors. We train them in basic trauma with survivors. We train them in basic trauma. What is trauma? What is the impact of trauma on the brain, on the body, on the social system? And help them implement programs that really take healing to a whole other level. So we try to look at healing not just from like a trauma-informed perspective, which I think is really important, but also can only go so far. I see trauma-informed as like identifying where there has been trauma and trying to create a sense of safety and kind of strength-based resilience. But the healing piece goes much further, and that's really around helping the survivor work through their story, their symptoms, the impact on the nervous system, drawing out those strengths, building hope, creating a plan for the future. So all the things that we would do for our own kids and family, right?
Yeah.
So that's the kind of support that we provide for local partners around the world and also here in the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm. My goodness. So, just a little thing that you do on the side, right? Doesn't take up too much of your time. Oh my goodness. Yes. I mean, there's just so much beauty in what you're doing there. And I think one of the things that I love is just how, you're thinking about what it means to be trauma informed and how we can really access and use community as a way to support healing. I think that's so powerful, and that we can go into these spaces and connect with others in such a really powerful way. I think that's really profound, the work that you all are doing. And so for any site, excuse me, please go to the website gratitudealliance.org and learn more about what they're doing and donate and support this organization, because there's so much more that they can do with your support, and they really are making such a huge difference. I've been through their level 1 training and have seen how they've taken concepts that can feel really daunting and really difficult and made them, really approachable and usable as we begin to do this healing work on all these different levels that you talked about, Amy. So I'm just in such appreciation. And, I can only imagine from this journey that you've been on as an individual, and then the journey that you've been on as a healer and someone who's working with others, that you've learned so much. And, what would you say are some of the key things that you would highlight that you've really taken away from this journey so far?
That's a great question. Gosh, but I think, the thing that I've learned the most, I would say, is just the power that each person has within them to heal. I feel like, in our Western world, and I can say this from my own personal experience, going through this programs or typical counseling programs where there's like an expert in a chair, and then like you're the person that's being healed that's laying on the couch, is can work. Yes, it can take a really long time. Talk therapy for me has been useful in some aspects, and in other aspects, I feel like it can also promote a dependency and kind of retelling the trauma story over and over. And what's been so powerful for me, like, it can also promote a dependency and kind of retelling the trauma story over and over. And what's been so powerful for me is this idea of healing in community. We are the experts of our own healing journey. I'm the expert of my own healing journey. Yes. And so, what does it look like? And especially for cultures around the world, we in our Western culture seem to have lost this concept of community. And what we learn from other cultures around the world is where community is just so embedded in what everyone does, and how they are and how they relate to each other. Trauma is something that's relational, and so healing should be too. And unfortunately, access to resources is not a democratic process. It's inaccessible often and inequitable for the communities around the world who really are disproportionately affected. The strength, the healing power, the inner wisdom is within the community. And when we go through a process together and utilize resources that we already have, like music and dancing and movement and song and drama, and beautiful rites of passage, cultural traditions that have been around for centuries, for thousands of years even. Those are the things that really have the power to take healing to a whole other level, spiritual level even, that's beyond sort of what we process in our cognitive minds when we are engaging in psychotherapy for like 30 years, right? So it's all about the inner wisdom and healing together in relationships.
Wow. Yes.
Yes.
I mean, come on now. That's something for us to keep in mind. We cannot heal in isolation. And listen, I know folks who are listening, being isolated is one of the easiest places where we can find ourselves as survivors of abuse. And so, it's understandable. We've been hurt by relationship. We've been hurt by other people, and so we sometimes find ourselves in this place where we want to withdraw and step back. Did you ever go through that, Amy? Did you ever find yourself in a place where it was hard to reach out to that community or connect into community? And if so, what did you find was helpful for you in those moments to spur you on and to help you find your people and build relationship?
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm the introvert that's kind of often been stuck in extrovert type of work or world. So it's really easy for me to fall back into, like, I'm doing this alone. I have to do this alone. I'm all alone, all of that stuff. Alone. I'm all alone, all of that stuff. For me, and this is the hard part, but it's that moment of courage where, like when you're eating, when you take a look at snacks that you have in front of you, and there's the apple and there's the donut. You know that the donut might feel good in the moment, but in the long run, it's just going to cause more pain. Or for me, it's like, okay, I'm going to feel pretty crappy after I eat this donut. So it's that moment of like, okay, I'm going to make a really intentional choice to reach for the apple or to reach out for that friend who's been messaging me and I'm refusing to respond to, because I know that actually I'm going to feel so good afterwards, and this is the moment where I get to make the choice. And it's sort of about reclaiming my own power. Yeah. I'm making a choice, and it's a choice for self-love. It's a choice for healing. It's a choice for relationship that is really hard to do in the moment. And sometimes I get it wrong too, and I'll reach for that donut or I'll stay in my isolation. And it's those moments when I just have just enough courage to respond back and say, hey, thanks for reaching out. And then the next step happens, and then the next step happens from there. So I don't have to look at it as this big thing like, oh, okay, now I've got to get my butt out of my house and go to this group or something. It's maybe just making that first connection. Yeah. And it's a small step, but it's such a powerful one.
It is, yeah. So little baby steps. Can we make it simple? And it's not go out there and, now I've got to create, be open and vulnerable with 100 people. It's, find that little first place where you can connect in and find that support that you need in this journey. So as we start to wrap up, Amy, I'd love to hear just what are some of the upcoming projects that you have lined up? What's next for you in this wild journey of your life?
Oh, gosh, we've got a lot in the pipeline. So I've been working on a book. It's kind of part memoir, part education around trauma and the impact of trauma, and kind of part social commentary on just how we've lost our connection to community and thoughts around what it takes to reclaim it. That book is to reclaim it. That book is the working title is called The Wound Myth. And I'm hoping to finalize that and have it published and out into the world by 2019. There's also another book, so I didn't really talk about this in this podcast, but I have my own relationship as a survivor of sexual abuse. So I was molested as a young child. I was about 5 years old. And the impact of that and my freeze response, and how that shows up time and time again in my relationships with other people, including sexual harassment in the workplace in my 20s, and then even well into recently in my 40s. So I have a story. It's sort of a Me Too story that kind of traces back the freeze response from that early childhood experience through these experiences later in life. That's part of an anthology called The Anatomy of Silence. So there's like 20-something other writers who are also sharing their stories. That will be published in 2019. And then in the meantime, we have workshops in the Bay Area. I'm so excited about this. We're involved in a workshop coming up this fall that is for self-identified aggressors of abuse. So this workshop is about breaking the cycle of harm. That's happening here in the Bay Area this fall. And we'll continue to also offer workshops and trainings with local partners around the world. So we're working with an organization that supports sex trafficking survivors and that works with women who are survivors of sexual and gender-based violence and are living as refugees in South Africa. That project will also hopefully happen in 2019. So we've got a number of other international projects in the pipeline as well.
I love it. Oh my gosh. I told you all you were about to hear from a kick-ass, badass woman. I mean, my gosh, Amy. So absolutely, folks, go to gratitudealliance.org. Get on their mailing list so you can hear more about all of these opportunities to receive support and to learn more. So there's upcoming workshops, there's events, there's, how you can, learn more about the impact of trauma around the world, and definitely sign up so you can, hear more about the launch of Amy's book. I cannot wait for that. I will be in line to buy that, get a signed copy. And then this Me Too anthology, The Anatomy of Silence. Wow, that sounds really exciting and fabulous to have a beautiful space for people to be telling their stories. And, of course, you can reach Amy at gratitudealliance.org. So, Amy, any final words for our listeners today?
Just want to say thank you to everyone. I truly believe that everyone in the world has been touched by trauma, and and that it's not a mental health issue; it's a universal human issue. And so, to that end, I'm just stand in solidarity with everyone. And please reach out and connect with me. I'm always here to listen, to share, and to be a friend and an ally in this work.
Awesome. Amy, thank you so much for being my guest, my friend, my colleague, and my neighbor. and thanks for being here and sharing your story with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you to everyone for tuning in and listening today. And don't forget to visit rachelgrantcoaching.com to learn more about sexual abuse recovery coaching and to explore the other resources available on the site. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast, leave us a review and a note of what you're gaining or learning from being here with us, and then tune in next time because we have so much more to share. Until then, take good care of you. Have you ever felt like you've tried everything to heal from the pain of sexual abuse, and yet nothing seems to really be helping? Well, one of the reasons why most people struggle to break free from the pain of past child abuse is because the techniques out there are positioned as a one-size-fits-all answers. What I want you to know is that there are actually 3 distinct phases on the path to recovery, and I'd love to share with you about these phases, what issues you must resolve to move to the next phase, and what kinds of support you'll need in order to move forward as quickly and completely as possible. The road to recovery is much easier when you know what stage you're in and what to do next. So don't hesitate. Go to www.rachelgrantcoaching.com/checklist and get your 9-page guide today.